Welcome to the Reel to Reel podcast, where the stories behind the board go on record. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, and we're here to give you an insider's look at the audio industry. I'm joined by my co-host, Drigo, of the Melrose Center audio team, and this month's guests, Joe Galdo and Juan Perez. Welcome, Joe and Juan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Good to be here.
Nice to have you. Well, Joe, why don't you give us a little 5-minute intro on how you got started and where you wound up?
Good. I started in junior high school. My mom used to play a lot of, from Rachmaninoff to Bossa Nova to all kinds of music, and it was painfully beautiful of me, some of the music that she played. So 7th grade, back in the day, talking early 60s, you get to junior high school. Back then it was 7th through 9th, and there was a school band, so I couldn't wait to start, get there, and I wanted to play French horn. That's what I wanted to do. There was a gentleman named Mr. Jesse Pearl. I owe that man so much. And so, he's doing the auditions and all that. This is late summer before school starts. And I say, French horn. He said, no, your lips are too big. You can play trombone or tuba. And I said, I'm not really into papa, really. So, we had this little moment there where it was a little awkward. He sits down in front of me, and I sit down facing each other, and he played something must have been very simple on his lap. He says, can you play that? I played it back, says, good, you're a drummer. And that's how it started. And the dude just took me under his wing and just, a wonderful, wonderful human being. From there, I went to high school, joined the band there, both the marching band and the regular band. Went to Miami-Dade, went to University of Miami. And as we were talking before the cameras were rolling, you kind of evolve into a band. Back then, live music was very much alive and well. And I'll never forget, I must have been in junior high or just beginning high school, had a really, really horrible drum set. My father was very poor. He couldn't buy me a fancy drum set, so it was just a hodgepodge of stuff. And I had a band. It was just me and 2 guitar players, no bass player, playing a silver tone out of the case where it had 2 inputs. So we had a mic, and we were playing for what they call a quince in Latin culture. When your daughter turns 15, it's like a debutante type of thing. And this guy was just a working, blue-collar dude, and he could afford to have a band, and it was just the 3 of us, and we made $15, $5 each. Before that, I made if I wanted to get anything, I had to go mow a lawn. And back in that day, you'd get maybe $3.50 to do a lawn. So, if I need a pair of sticks or a tambourine or whatever, X amount of lawns. So here I'm playing, and I get paid. That was my beginning of my career. And you evolve through high school and so on, so you start to get into real bands, and there are clubs everywhere. So you could start playing, and as I was saying before, very, very blessed to have been born when I was born, and the clubs were like 7-Elevens. They were everywhere, where there was Big Daddies, whatever there was, and we played 6 nights a week, 5 sets a night, and we practiced. We'd go to the club because they were closed during the day, and your gear would be set up. It's not like you set up, play one night, and you're gone. You'd be there weeks, sometimes months, if the club owner liked you. So, we got into the place, rehearsed 1 o'clock till 7. We tried to learn a song a week, whether it was Tower of Power or Earth, Wind and Fire or Steely Dan, whatever it was. And that somehow evolved into starting to make records. And the way that happened was one of the first bands I was in, Brimstone, got a record deal with Atlantic. It's the first time in the studio. Later on, we fell into the bass player in the band I was in called Foxy. His roommate was Ray Martinez, was an engineer at TK Records. That was really wonderful. That was almost like a college education. We got in there. After we played at the club, we'd go and sneak into the studio and work till like the cleaning crew would come in and sneak out. And suddenly we had an album, and the album was accepted by TK Records. And so that was the second record deal. From there, we became one of the rhythm sections of TK Records. Everybody from Betty Wright to Bobby Caldwell to George and Gwen McCrae to Benny Lattimore. I loved, one of my happiest moments is working there. And it was a chaotic place. It was a mess. I only got paid $20 a song. That's what you got paid. So every Thursday, you'd show up to the spot. There was a real nice lady there called Glenn, I think, and you get 5, 7, however many sessions you worked on, you get a check. There was a liquor store just a couple blocks away. You go cash your check there amongst all the workers that would cash your check. And so, yeah, all night playing, all day in the recording studio. And then little by little, you make these connections by never saying no. So if you said to me, hey, man, there's a session in Hialeah and it only pays $5, or maybe don't, I'm not going to say no, I'm going to be there, because in those really kind of out of the way piddly sessions is where you find a great horn arranger or a really good bass player or whatever. So you just kind of, it's just all a connection. Little by little, I graduated to Criteria, which is where Bruce Hensal is from. And well, he's not from there, he's from everywhere, but it was just a whole other level. Now I'm working with, real national acts from ABBA to you name it. And that was really great because there were 5 rooms in the establishment, and you just show up and hang out. And all of a sudden it's somebody, okay, come in here. We need a harmony, or we need some percussion, or good, you're free next week, come in, you play drums on such and such a record. And that just, climbs. From there, I met many, many great engineers and producers. One of them was Alex Satkin, who introduced me to Chris Blackwell from Island Records. And I got auditioned to play with Robert Palmer. He was going on a tour. This is 78, 79. I passed the audition, and it was a wonderful time I had there. And I really loved working for that artist because of the label. The artist was great too. But for 10 years, I thought, how can I get back into the orbit of this record company? And, I just worked and just became, knock on wood, more successful and more viable and more whatever. And at some point, 1988, 89, somewhere in there, I had really good success with Gloria Estefan, producing her records and playing and arranging and composing. And I got a meeting with Chris Blackwell and so see if I could get into back with Island Records, this time as a producer and a co-publishing deal. So I did that for, I don't know, almost 20 years. We opened a recording studio in South Beach called South Beach Studios, where Chris and I were partners on. A great recording studio, but we can go into that later. But I hope that's enough of an answer for you.
And Juan, how about your...
Well, it's kind of similar. My mother was a piano player in Cuba. I was born in Cuba and just grew up around music. My mother playing classical and Spanish music all the time. And then we would get some of the popular songs from the States. We get some of the rock songs, and I started getting hip to Elvis and stuff like that. And then the revolution came, and I came, like I was telling Joe beforehand, I came first. They sent me in 1962 when I was 11. And then I stayed with some family here. But then as time went on, I heard the Beatles and a lot of the rock music. So, like Joe, started garage bands and stuff like that. And from there, bands developed. We started touring, from here to Ocala, and then went to Gainesville, and then to Georgia. And, little by little, we started writing music, and I wasn't that fortunate to get a record contract right off the bat. We were really struggling, but after that one band broke up, I remember getting a call from Tony Battaglia, our mutual friend, and asking me if I wanted to go to Miami and do a conga track. I said, "You been drinking, man? You can't find a conga player in Miami?" He said, "Well, Jay Ferguson's doing this record at, Bayshore. And they had a couple of guys, but they just want to play tumbao and all this cute, real ultra Latin stuff. They want something a little more subtle, So that was my first big session, was on Jay's record.
With Bill Simzik producing.
Bill was executive producer, but Ed Michel was producer. And the Eagles were recording at night doing the end of the long run. So we were there during the day doing tracks, but that was a great experience. And, that was my first big session.
And now you're playing with your wife.
I met her in New Orleans in '94. And, I guess we finished her 5th CD. But in the meantime, I did a lot of road work with the Bellamy's and a lot of studio work where I met Joe at Criteria.
Well, that's, I know Beth is a friend of the library's. She's done this show several times. And
Definitely.
so for those of you that don't know, Juan's wife is Beth McKee, singer-songwriter, who was in Evangeline.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
On Margaritaville Records?
Margaritaville MCA, yeah.
Yep. Wow.
Awesome. And Jay Ferguson comes from the band Spirit, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, Jay. Well, and then after Spirit, he had JoJo Gunn with his brother and Curly, Mark Andes, who was the
Curly played drums on...
Curly Smith
yeah.
was the drummer in JoJo Gunn.
He was a drummer on Real Life Ain't This Way, the record I played on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because he was in the band with Jay.
Yeah.
So, Joe, you mentioned that you kind of built the studio. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Maybe like how it started and a little bit of this backstory?
With Chris Blackwell, it was all talked about at 2, 3 in the morning, hanging out very casually. And I said, listen, I'm not working with you, with a company. I'm from here. I would love to build some place where we can ferment local talent. And he had just sold Island Records. Let me see. Polygram bought Motown, London, A&M, Island, and I forget what, maybe another couple of labels in 88, 89. And I think he sold that for about $250 million. So he had a pocket full of money. When he came to sign me, he was the kind of guy who always wanted to be where the sweat and the dirt was. So at that time, the place to be was in Coconut Grove. But what he did was he stayed at South Beach in this little motel beat up to hell. The air conditioner was, the air conditioner units that were being held up by bricks and stuff. South Beach at that point was falling apart. It was just a place where, drug dealers and not a good place, but a beautiful place. So he saw that. He saw the potential. And he bought 10 properties, like within a year or two. And one of them, the first one was the Marlin Hotel. Beautiful boutique place that he made. The Art Deco architecture in South Beach is just beyond beautiful. So if it wasn't for him, the South Beach phenomena that happened in the early 90s through today would have never happened, really. But anyway, he bought that place. So we're talking, and I forget, we might have been who knows where on this planet, but he said, why don't we just build a studio? And I said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. And he said, go with it, carte blanche. So I started building the studio, bought I think it was a E-Series SSL, and, loaded it up with outboard gear. And the location was just second to none. And it became, knock on wood, a success story, the studio.
So what were you doing mainly, like as far as like the your involvement in the studio? Was it just like playing drums? Did you have like a bigger part in the studio?
Yeah, great question. Not too much drumming. At that point, I was becoming more of an administrative, I had a publishing deal and an in-house producing deal with Island. So I really wanted to do more of fermenting and trying to, put the wind in the sails of local artists and Chris Blackwell on Island. So my involvement was making sure the studio was put together well. I used Ross Alexander and Speedy. You remember
Right,
Speedy?
Speedy Arthur.
Yeah, and these guys used to make great recording studios. So, I called them up and they came and we spent, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8 months building this thing. We had to excavate under the building to get the ceiling height, so we were between floors. It was an incredible undertaking. And we opened in early 92 or late 91. And from that point on, we became incredibly quickly autonomous from Island Records. It suddenly became, the word got out and everybody from, you name it, we had everybody working there. Very, very lucky for me, I was working with a guy named Cesar Sugby. He's actually graduated from Full Sail here. We got a lot of interns from Full Sail. Most of them were not paying attention in class, but the ones that were paying attention in class and were talented were beyond great.
Yeah.
So I remember Cesar being an assistant on a bunch of my sessions, and I knew he had it. You know, he had the ear, he had the sixth sense, he was quick. And so at one point, the engineer I was working with had to go home. There was a family matter. He was going to be gone for a while. So I just said, Cesar, you're on. And he passed with flying colors. But anyway, we were big fans of a guy named Tom Lord-Alge.
Oh, yeah.
Tom Lord-Alge and his brother, Chris Lord-Alge. So as we were putting the studio together, we were thinking, what would Tom like? And we knew his entire gear list. We were getting gear from Australia, from all over the place. And the studio sounded great. And what really was great, that just, you know, again, you got to thank your lucky stars. We signed an artist named Tracy Bonham out of Massachusetts and Tripping Daisy out of Houston. And Tom Lord-Alge was set to mix those records. So, man, I really got to lobbying to get him to come to our studio, because I knew once he'd come there, he'd never leave. And sure enough, he came down to mix Tripping Daisy, I think it was first. And within 3 years, it became his home. So I didn't have to do much, man. We had Tom Lord-Alge there. He was booked months and months ahead, from the Stones to Bowie to Blink-182, you name it. The cream of the crop was there. U2 worked there several times because they were on Island Records and loved the place. But it was a wonderful existence of having the cream of the crop playing there. You know, later on it was Pharrell Williams, and that whole culture was just wonderful. It was really, really great. However, towards the end, because of technology change and the record business changing, I was working 3 times as hard to make a third of the revenue. And it was a 24/7, you know, my phone was calling me 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon. There was no difference. People impetuously wanted to get in, very demanding. So it got around 2007-ish, somewhere in there, started getting difficult.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like, there was a lot of work to get up until that point. So in terms of, for example, like a lot of people coming in, were you involved in, like, for example, a lot of like songwriting for different people, or was it just kind of like running the studio?
Both. Mostly running the studio. You have a CD there, so you found somewhere with David Byrne. This is a project I was working with him. And if the studio was not booked, which is very seldom, I mean, I have calendars where 3-4 sessions a day, you know, and I had 3 rooms. It was just really unbelievable. When that happened, and I was worked to be the musician and producer or composer, then if the studio was open, I would go there. But most of the time, I was there to pleasantly disorient the artists that worked there. And by that, this is what I'm going to say. I was a kid with a record deal at one point. I was a producer at one point. I worked with a record company at one point. And now I had a recording studio. So I knew the angst, even though people don't really want to admit it. But let's say the 4 of us started making a record. You were the producer, I'm the artist. You're the engineer, you're the composer. We don't know each other. And we're hoping to God that we're going to come up with magic, right?
Right.
So there is a certain amount of like, oh my God, it's just going to happen, you know. So my job was to bring Cuban coffee, you know, or bring something that would take their minds off of the mission at hand and only enhance it. I don't have one picture of me with any of the artists that worked at the spot. I never called them clients. I was there if they needed me, but they could do whatever they wanted in that studio as long as they were respectful to the building. And my job there was just to keep things moving along and make artists feel very, very comfortable. Because if Beyonce comes in, she's got jeans and a T-shirt on. She's not made up. She's going there to work.
Right.
So I'm not there to get in her face or ask her for an autograph or any of that stuff. I'm there to make sure nobody knows she's there, that she and her crew are doing what they need to do to create that magic, and to move on. So that was my gig. And I think the success came from them appreciating the fact that I was once part of their situation. Now, if I got to know them real well, for whatever reason, I would make them like 20 CD compilations of Brazilian music, say, or Rishi Sakamoto, or some African or Indian stuff, just as a creative person to creative person. Hey, man, check out these textures and changes and stuff like that. But I would leave it like that. Rivers Cuomo from Weezer, he liked to play golf, so we'd go out and play a round of golf. But he was, to me, a national treasure. But, he was a complex dude. So you dealt with that stuff, played golf with Aerosmith, played golf with all kinds of people. But my situation there was just to make him feel welcome and stay out of the way.
So that was like a big part, just like making sure that everybody felt good, they felt at home, and you were kind of like the one person who really facilitated a lot of that.
Again, I was really fortunate to work in studios all over the world, and I'd rather work in a studio that was beat up and falling apart, but the staff, the team were joyous about what they did, as opposed to go into a studio that was brand new, everything worked great, spotless, but there was a kind of a uptightness about the spot.
Yeah.
There was limitations. So I like chaos. I like sweat and dirt. I like that stuff. So I just want to make sure that when they came to our spot, they were very comfortable. And if they wanted to bring their wives and kids in, and I would take them out to the Everglades if they wanted to, or I'd be like a what is that called? The hotels,
Concierge.
Concierge, exactly. And I love doing that.
That's cool. That's cool.
Well, and the fond memories of the Cuban coffee and guava pastries in Miami.
Yes. Cuban sandwiches,
Yeah.
whatever I could turn them on to that I knew for a fact they never had.
Yeah.
The fruits, all that stuff.
Well, let's get around to our mutual friend Tony Battaglia, and Juan, how you got involved with Tony.
I guess Tony moved up to Orlando from Miami in the early 70s. And somehow we met up and started a band. And, we played quite a few years. And he's, like I said, he's the one that got me that gig down in Miami with Jay. And throughout all these years, we've, when he moved up to New York, I would go up and do a session with him, or, so we've been playing music on and off all these years up till this day.
Yeah. Wow. That's
so
great.
So both of you guys have mentioned being in bands and just kind of things growing. So I'm sure a lot of people listening are in bands. So what are some tips that maybe you can give people in terms of trying to take it to the next level? Was it just kind of accidental, or was it just kind of something that you guys were planning for? Just kind of maybe expand a little bit on just the whole band thing. Because for example, I'm in a band, and I mean, if you're in a band, like it's 24/7, you're constantly working on it. And if you're not working on it, then you're thinking about working on it. So what were some of the things that you were kind of thinking about of either trying to take it to the next level, or kind of like what you mentioned, like you started playing music back in like high school and stuff like that. How did some of those different things come about in terms of now this is a real thing?
Well, another great question, and I connecting with you because as you speak, I feel what you're saying. The one thing that's different, and I feel for you guys, is in my day, nightclubs were everywhere. Like I said, there were like 7-Elevens. Everywhere there was a nightclub, and every nightclub had a band, sometimes two bands. Some of my favorite gigs, we would start, say, at 11:30, 12, midnight. There was a band that had started at 9. And then we'd tag team. They'd play one more set, and then we start, and then we'd play till 6 in the morning. About 2:33, the club would empty out, and around 4, it would be filled with musicians and prostitutes and bartenders, and the place would just jump hard. I mean, it would just take it to some other level. You guys don't have that, today. So we had a ready-made fermenting base of whatever it was, the Big Daddies, Playpen, they were all over there, Lauderdale and Miami. So you're right. You do it all day long. If you're not doing it, you're thinking about it. If you get sick, tough luck. You got to go on that night. Sometimes in the dressing room, I'd be dying. But once you counted off, you forgot all about it.
Yeah.
You got off the stage. So the one thing I'm going to say, which I feel that you feel the same way, is you try to do what you do to the best of your ability. You have to be as good as the big boys. You're not making a record for your mom. You're making a record for the world. So you have to be realistic about what you're doing and your perspective on how good or not good you are. I used to have a little Sony Walkman that I put behind my drums every night and record all 5 sets. And on my way home, I'd listen to it. You're rushing this. This is not right. This guy's hitting the wrong chord here. Tomorrow I'm going to have to address that. Whatever it was. So I was driven. If my kid was talking to me, but there was a really cool bass line on some commercial, whoa, what's that? Where there was the tonation of the bass or the part, whatever it was. So our antennas were on all the time. So my thing to anybody that's in a band right now, spend as much time as you can. If you can't play 5 sets a night, 6 nights a week, well, get into 5 bands so you can play with band A at 9 p.m., pack your stuff up, go to the next club and play, because I don't see any other way. It's really hard because I didn't have to move my drums. They were there for weeks at a time. Where you guys play 1 set, maybe 2 if you're lucky, you got to pack up and you're gone, just a one-nighter. Yep. So I think if I was up and coming these days, I would try to be in as many bands as possible so that I could work as much as possible, because there's nothing better than to be on your instrument. That's true. Listen, I had a golf ball size big thing here from
just a callus, a big knot.
A big callus, exactly. It was just this thing. The cheeks of my butt were like leather because you're sitting down all day long. My butt would hurt more than my hands, but from just being sitting down there that much time. So all I say is drive. Take joy in learning, and just every time you learn more, you look over this plateau and you go, oh my God, look how much more I don't know. And that should be your impetus. Sometimes you're going to fall into ruts and everything you're doing you feel sucks, it's horrible. And the slightest thing will get you out of that rut, whether you sit differently, whether you change the height of your drum, whether you listen to something somewhere, and off you go again. But that's something that I still have as a human being. I heard say that you can never stay young. That's a proposition that we're never going to win, but you can stay new. And that is something that will take you forever. You know what I'm saying? The day my body doesn't function anymore, I'll find something that'll make me enthusiastic to want to get up out of bed every day. Yeah. So you stay new. You're listening to new music from whatever bands, and they're, as you well know, it's like a tree. They're all connected. Yep. So this drummer played with this band all of a sudden, and it's to me it's a wonderful thing to want to stay new.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of drummers in the bands that I listen to, they have played with many other bands. So when you really start looking at, precisely just the drummers, you'll find one guy, he's played with like this roster of people, and then the next drummer, he's played with this roster of people. And it's not so much label related as much as it is, oh, they met them on tour, they met them on this, and then before you know it, they're like, oh, well, we have a spot. Do you want to try out? And it's not so much as trying out, but it's more like, well, we already know you. We already know you can do it. So
they're not even going to ask the guy if they don't know.
Yeah. And I agree with the fact that like sometimes you do have to kind of switch up some things. I know personally for me, I've gone from like just playing like normal 5/8 sticks to like now I'm playing like marching sticks.
3S, guys, if you don't know what that is, it's 3S. They're like humongous. It's like playing with baseball bats. But it's the greatest for your chops. Is the greatest. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've progressively gotten thicker and thicker and thicker.
3S,
like now,
my God.
They're weapons.
Dude, I feel sorry for your cymbals.
I think you have to have a permit for that.
But
holy guacamole,
ever
bro.
Since I switched, I haven't broken anything. And I used to break things all the time. And I think it was because I was playing with like very thin sticks and I was just hitting them harder. where now I hit the cymbals lighter and the toms harder. But, you know, I do agree with that in terms of you have to kind of switch up some things as you go along, because then you kind of get a little bit too comfortable. And sometimes you just kind of have to break away from it.
Yeah. Do you find that because of the speed and precision that you guys play, that you are playing a little bit softer, like you're saying?
In terms of my personal thing, it's everything is geared towards the genre. So it's not so much as like, oh, I'm playing something to sound nice. It's like, how can you play faster and not get tired?
Yeah, yeah.
That's literally the bottom line. So you tighten up your snare drum as tight as you can. No wood, steel.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the way to go.
Project, man.
And you just you basically just try to play as hard as you can, but at the same time as accurate as you can. Click tracks in your cans.
I love click tracks. Love them. It's like having a great percussionist that you can lean on.
Yeah. And you can even go as far as to have cues on your click tracks that you can either put yourself or just have like a little like note for yourself that you can put on those click tracks. So if there's a part that you're going fast, you know, okay, I hear this next part in like 4 beats, that's when I have to go into the next part.
Okay.
So that way you don't lose yourself from just listening to the same.
Yeah, because you guys are riffing almost. To me, metal these days is like incredible speed, incredible precision. I mean, it's like Steve Vai on times who knows how much. I mean, every generation, which I love, takes it to the next level. You know, a lot of older people will tell you, well, in my day, you know what? I'm 72 years old. I only listen to new music, believe it or not. I get Apple Music and I get All Music. They send me like probably 80 or so artists. 99% are unlistenable, so I just drop the needle and go on. But I look for that youth that's got it, you know, that's timeless. And your generation is like, we could have never thought. It's just like Michael Phelps at swimming, you know what I'm saying? Which is wonderful, you know. Everything keeps growing, gets better through science, through knowledge, whatever it is. So I can't even fathom what you guys do.
And one of the toughest parts, this is one of the last things I'm going to say about it, is because of that, originality is so much tougher because everybody has already done it. So if you have this great idea, all you have to do is just type it in on Google and just immediately you're going to find someone else doing it. So you have to find a way to either do it again in an original and unique way, or to just revamp it and take that as inspiration and then redo the whole thing.
I feel you 100%. I never had much faith in my playing, but I had a lot of imagination. And if you went to my house, I had floor-to-ceiling records and CDs in different rooms in my house. All I did was listen to music. So if I was playing with a band, say Stephen Stills, I would know that he was into Latin music. So I would know to like maybe put my sticks away, take a little timpani mallet, take my snares off, maybe a little stick with some rattle, knowing that I would turn them on that way.
Yeah.
So using that imagination and finding your own lane, for me, was much easier than it is for you. You're right. You guys have seen it all. You've done it all. And it's really hard. And on top of that, you don't have that club experience where you're playing every night. So your generation has a lot tougher than mine did. And I recognize that.
So, Juan, for example.
So, you know, like Joe was saying, you know, the practice thing, you have to be ready for everything, you know, and you have to work as much as you can. And in my situation, I was working in original rock bands. And, you know, writing music and touring. And one day I got a call for an audition for a country band. And, you know, being Cuban and being into rock and roll, Latin music, I had never really listened to country music.
Out of the element a little bit.
Totally out of the element. So I went for the audition and, you know, I sat there in front of them. They played their songs, which I was not familiar with. And, you know, I was playing and I saw them smiling and kind of nodding their head. I said, these guys are being really nice, you know. And when we finished the audition, they said, you know, we like what you're doing. You got the job, you know. They said, well, we hear you also play congas and Latin percussion. I said, yeah. So, you know, in 2 weeks' time, I find myself in L.A. doing a session, for a very well-known producer out there. And when I get to the studio, I see a guy sitting in the front room with a stick bag, and I recognize it's Carlos Vega.
Oh my God,
drummer.
Carlos Vega.
And I'm really nervous already, being out of my element. But I told myself, I said, I'm going to play this record. I know Carlos is like the best there is, but so Michael Lloyd, the producer, waved us in. They said, look, I got Carlos out there. And the Bellamy's said, well, let's go through it a couple of times, see how Juan does, So we started cutting the track, and second take, I had it. And then, I felt, what an accomplishment, you know what I mean?
Dude.
So Howard Bellamy stuck his head out to the waiting room and said, we got it, Carlos. You can go home now.
Wow,
that's one of the great moments of my life right there.
Dude, I can't imagine.
So from there on, it was like, I did probably, when I first started touring with him, I did 3 studio albums with him. We were the only band. No, there was another band in Nashville. There was the Gatlin Brothers and the Bellamy Brothers. That the road band and the studio band was the same band.
That's really, really
unusual. Very unusual. So I cut those 3 records with him. I played them 5 number 1 hits and countless top 20. And so I feel very fortunate, I'm given that opportunity, And after probably 4 years on the road, I think I had enough, because it was like we were out there like 240 days a year.
Yeah, that's tough. I just came back from like a 10-day tour, and I'm sure like the circumstances were different, but just sleeping in your car and eating basically garbage.
Yeah, we had a bus, but still, when you're on tour for basically almost 4 years. Yeah. And I had a young boy, and it was like, being away from my son was kind of hard. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. That I can't even imagine that. So in terms of, for example, getting into some of these different gigs, right? And you mentioned that you played on some of these big, successful opportunities. How did you get started on, for example, getting those? Were they just like by coincidence, or did you just like meet someone that kind of got you started into those, or were you just like right place at right time?
I think it was a combination of getting myself ready for something that I didn't know that was going to happen, but you have to be ready.
Right.
It's like whatever opportunity probably presents itself to you, you might not think you're ready, but having put all that work that you have into your music, you probably will be ready, Yeah. So, when I got the opportunity for the Bellamy's or whatever other opportunity came along, I've been working really hard at it. Like Joe said, it's just stay ready for whatever happens.
Just grab it by the horns when it comes.
And never turn down a gig. Yeah. Like Joe was talking about getting paid $20. I was probably getting about 12, So, it's what you love to do. Yeah. I mean, even at this point in my life, I'm playing a festival Saturday, I feel so grateful at 72 to be able to still do what I love. Right. That's a big deal.
Absolutely. Drums, I feel like, is one of those things where you're probably going to do it until you can't.
That's exactly right.
It's not like, I feel like, because I also play other instruments, and like you get kind of tired of the same mundane things. But as far as drums, they can be mundane, but there's just so much you can do, and technically you're just hitting things.
But I'm going to tell you something right now. As you get older, your kit gets smaller.
I've tried to condense down as much as possible, and even now, like even if I try to have like an extra cymbal, there's just no way. So I think I found the setup that I play with, and I tend to notice that compared to other people, my setup is very tight. So and kind of like what we were talking about, to where everything is genre specific, to where If I have everything tighter, then I can get to the next part quicker without having to move so much and without having to exert so much effort. And sometimes I see like a lot of drummers who, they're just like, making big moves and everything, and I'm like, can't do that. Not me. That's not me.
Just keep it close. Keep it close.
I can't even headbang at all. Nothing. I can't even move my head whatsoever. I'm just stuck. And my performance is just trying to play accurately.
Yeah, I'm down to a kick, snare, hi-hat, and ride crash. If I can't do it with that, then I can't do it. You know?
Talk about older and smaller. Tell that to Terry Bozzio. But he makes use of every one of them.
Every single
the guy's
thing.
Amazing. His independence is from some other planet.
Amazing.
So have you guys participated in any sort of like for example soundtracks or maybe like something in that kind of side of the spectrum at all?
I've done an independent film up in North Carolina. Beth and I worked on some of that soundtrack a couple of years ago. Believe it or not, Tony Battaglia has gotten me some work with commercials, beer companies or, Disney, stuff like that. But I haven't worked on any major motion picture soundtrack.
I mean, I would say Disney's pretty big. If you're getting on Disney?
We did some music for, some of the kids shows and stuff. Like Tony did a lot of that music,
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
What about you?
I love doing jingles, which most people will tell you they hate.
I forgot I did a lot of jingles.
But, well, that's what I mean, commercials, whether it's Publix or, whatever, Busch Gardens, whatever it was. I worked with a guy named Tom Hartman, really talented guy, but all over the place. So he used me to sort of tighten things up and make sense of it. But I like dealing with the suits that would come in and, to justify their existence, they go, oh, how about a tambourino? Yeah, sure, dude, whatever. Soundtracks, no, I've done some records that were really big hits, and they ended up being part of the movie. And I did one soundtrack with a Emulator 2, Linn Drum, I forget what else, and I did the Foley and the music on this instrument.
Wow.
Yeah, because it read SMPTE, so if the guy was going to shut the door, it was great fun. It was for some wrestling movie. Don't ask me what it's called. I think it's on that. What is it? IBMNS, whatever the film.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I think it's in there. But other than that, no. But I think it's a beautiful art form. Movie music to me is like the classical music of our times, and some of it is really, really great.
Yeah.
But I have to bring this up because when I met Joe at Criteria, we were doing the last Bellamy record that I did before, I left the band, and Joe came in with a Linn Drum machine, and I had recorded in L.A. and Nashville, never seen a Linn Drum machine, but they hired him to program this one track that I remember, can't remember exactly the name of the song, but I was mesmerized by this machine that Joe brought in, and that was the first time I was exposed to that.
I think we could do a whole show, really, on that rig, because I had the rig of doom. I had a Simmons, I had the Linn, I had the TR-808. Ross Alexander, who was a genius, one of the few geniuses that I knew, made me a box that whatever would come in would come out as a square wave. And so that would trigger my Simmons. Then he made a DIN plug from the TR-808 to the Linn Drum. And in my laundry room, I had a Yamaha 4-track cassette player and this rig. And I was working with Larry Dermer, who's my co-writer, musician. He had a Poly Moog. I had a, Sequential Circuits. I forget the name of that. Anyway.
Prophet.
Prophet. We made the entire album that had conga and hit after hit with a, I think it was, Commodore 64 with a Sequential Circuits plug-in that was called MIDI 64 that I think made it have 12 tracks and just thousands of notes capability. And I so much embraced that, and I'll tell you why. I was in a band that was very successful, and then we broke up. And I'm 30 years old, and what do I do with my life? I'm I now have a family, and I'm very cognizant that I got to put food on the table. And so I thought, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to open a drum shop. So I had an attorney friend of mine who was also a drummer, and we did a lot of research. And one of those was me going to the NAMM show in Anaheim in 1981. I'm walking down the hallways of NAMM, and I'm hearing this drummer doing this 6/8 fusion thing. So I step up, and I turn around, it's this big black box playing this stuff. A big moment of fear. It's like, oh my God, what is this thing? And it was Roger Linn, and he's explaining to me, well, you know, I sample this snare drum, and I do this, and I go, whoa. So I walk away thinking, wow, that was a scary situation. Months later, I'm going down South Dixie Highway through Coral Gables, and I'm hearing a song by Elton John called Nobody Wins. And I'm hearing the drummer says, man, that sounds like James Gadsden from California, and he's playing his ass off, man, and the fills, and he's coming on the one, it's just feeling, it's grooving, right? So I bought a lot of records. My whole life, I bought a lot of music. I look in the back, it says drums, Roger Linn. And I go, whoa. I immediately, cool. When I get home, I tell my wife, look, I saw this in Anaheim. Now I'm hearing it. Nobody knows about this yet, at least where we're at.
That's true.
And if I don't get on this first, some guitar player, some keyboard player is going to have it. And I'm sorry, but this is the future.
You were the man.
It was just one of those things, again, the universe just puts it right in front of you.
Yeah.
My wife was a flight attendant, so I could fly anywhere for free. Standby, but I could get there. And Tampa had, I forget the name of their music store, it was a big one. And they had the Linn Drum. It was Thoroughbred, thank you.
Thoroughbred music.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time there. It was a cool place. And the Linn Drum was 3,900 and so, about 4 Gs. Almost what we had in the bank, right? And I told Nancy, I said, listen to me. If I'm going to stay in this business, this is not going away. So I got the Linn Drum, learned to program it as a drummer, right? Because a lot of people program Linn Drums, they sound horrible.
Yeah.
And so I had the Linn Drum, I had my drums. So a lot of producers would say, dude, don't even bring this thing in here. Get on your drums, that's what we hired you for. The engineers loved it because they didn't have to go miking, you know. They're great engineers, but they like both. But they kind of like, wow, what is this thing? You know, engineers are usually very about embracing what's coming around the bend.
Yeah.
So yeah, that opened ridiculous doors for me because producers used to me all the time, and they give me a pat in the head and they kept me working, but they were never going to let my foot through that door. And that's where I wanted to be, in the control room. I thought I had more to offer in there than out here.
Yeah.
So the Linn Drums, and then the Emulator 2, which up to then you have to be a millionaire to own a Synclavier or any of those instruments, so that was out of my reach. So once the Emulator, which again was one of those stroke of luck where I'm at another NAMM show, I think it was, and there's the people from EMU Systems. And I saw a friend that owned a recording studio in Soho, and he turned me on to them, and I was one of the first maybe 6 people on the planet who had the Emulator 2. Now I had the Emulator 2 in my laundry room, all this stuff, you know, hooked up. I'm sampling my ass off from records, from African music to my kids saying hello to pots and pans. I was just a sampling fool, you know? And that opened the doors. And what I loved was to be able to play with a loss of physics. I remember a Peter Gabriel song, on that song that had Shock the Monkey. There was a song on that record that there was you could tell it's like a metal pipe hitting like the being dragged through the street, asphalt. And I'm working with Ron and Howard Albert. By the way, Ron and Howard Albert are 2 people that I also owe everything to. And I think the record was with John Anderson of Yes. And I bring this record in, and I get laughed out of the control room. I'm telling you, this is not going away. So having that ability to do a real tight track and suddenly take a sample from a Studio One record in Jamaica, you know, of a drum fill that's super roomy, and then suck it back into the tight track and be able to play with that stuff was, to me, was what a Pandora's box of fun. And then I was able to somehow do pre-production in my laundry room and show you, Drigo, if I was working on your record pretty much done as far as the creative part and the sonic part of it. And that opened the doors to me to become the producer, composer that I always wanted to be.
Yeah, and I mean, for example, nowadays there's different tools like Superior Drummer, like, all these drum programming softwares where, for example, if you have like a not so great drummer, you could essentially, and I've done this a lot of times where, I mean, they may or may not know. A lot of the times you end up having to tell them, oh yeah, this is you, but it's not them. And you end up just programming everything, and it really saves the whole recording.
Yeah.
Because especially nowadays where everything is pretty much overdubbed, there's not really people playing in the same room anymore.
That's a shame.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways you do kind of lose a little bit of that magic that would happen. But I feel like coming from like very like niche based genre, it would be impossible. But in terms of the tools nowadays, it's crazy how much you don't need to really play your instrument anymore.
Yeah.
Where like, you could just go in and just be really good at programming and then fool everyone.
Well, listen, the three of us are drummers.
Mm-hmm.
We know this is something that's irrefutable. The drummer can't screw up, right? If
Everybody else can screw up with the
exactly.
drummer.
If you're on that
Absolutely.
stage or on that record, if you flub it, the whole world knows. It's just like dying. It's like, it's like getting poked in the eye with an ice pick. It just can't happen.
Yeah.
So we have that angst, depending on how we get out of bed that morning. It's like, it's on us, man. We're driving that bus.
Yeah.
Everybody's bopping their head to the guitar or, looking at the guitar player and all that, but they're bopping their heads to us.
Yeah.
And if that groove is not there, if those fills aren't authoritative, it's all over. So we are hounds for perfection of groove. Just got to make sure that house would be like a bowl of jelly. And if you're outside that club, the club's like, doosh, dash, doosh. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Is that. And so when all this programming and all stuff came through, we decided to, all right, this is a nice crutch to have. Saying that, because I was one of the first doing it, after a while, it was repugnant to me not to have the dudes in the room, not to have that synergy of, hey man, try this out, or what about this, And so programming was great. It was fun. It opened doors for me, but I kind of rebelled against it there towards the end, because it was like, where are my buddies? I mean, where's this sweat? And, so.
Every major record I ever played on was everybody in the room. Like all the Bellamy records, the lead guitar and the final vocals were overdubbed. Everything else went down.
Cool.
The way it went down. And back then, no click track.
Wow. See, I've never recorded drums with everyone in the room.
How about this? It's the way it used to be done, which I did a lot of. You're in a drum in a little house inside of there. Mm-hmm. The woodwinds are here. The brass are over there. The rest of the rhythm section's over here. There's a nervous guy in the control room that's copied the parts. He's transcribed all the parts for everybody, right? And there's like 15, 20 people in this room. And you read the chart, right, while the engineer is getting their levels. Every time there'd be like the trumpet player, the second trumpet player, hey man, is that a B flat or is that, oh my God, and the guy would run out of the control room and with the eraser and put the right note, okay, let's do it. Then we'd take it. Because in the union, we'd played 3 songs in 3 hours. That was your limit. So you start at 10, you play till 1, take a lunch break, you come back at 2, and you play till 5. The next day you do the same thing. You did the whole album in 2 days.
Wow.
And that's the way it was. And it was wonderful
I mean,
to
that's
do
the way
that
it
thing.
was, yeah.
The string section was over here, the woodwinds, the brass, it was wonderful to do those. And I'm happy to, have been part of that. But also, like Juan is saying, the band, the rhythm section in the same room was wonderful. You'd have bogos, Bruce would come out, set them all up, make sure everybody had their eye contact, yet the separation was there, and off we went. It was great.
Yeah, it was. I miss that. I mean, the last live record I did was Tony produced one of Beth's records.
Right.
And we all played live.
In your house.
In my
right?
house, yeah. And it was great.
And it's a great sounding record.
Now, you were there. You came in a lot of times.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is going to come from like a biased point of view, but in terms of like us drummers, going into a recording studio, what would be some of the things that you guys would recommend in terms of just having, being prepared, some of those kind of things, or just like general tips? I mean, I know for me, some of the things that I tell whenever I have a drummer coming in is please have more than one set of drumsticks, at least. And
do you really have to say that?
I mean, I'm just gonna get it out of the way, but or
I didn't hear that, man.
Or one of the other things is if your pedals squeak, fix that. Which kind of comes along with with guitar players, how like you have to tell them brand new strings, make sure you set it up. But outside of just like the general general kind of tips, what are some of the things that maybe you could kind of give the listeners that they may not be thinking about in terms of recording in the studio, going in as a drummer or a session drummer, where you may or may not know the parts and you kind of have to be flexible? What would be some of your tips?
If you have a chance to hear the music first, be prepared for the session. And if somebody doesn't bring more than one pair of sticks or the pedal squeaks, I don't think they should be in the studio.
You never know. They may be killer drummers. You're not all
right,
that
Joe.
together.
I was a little mean there. I apologize. But, just be prepared in every way that you can. Make sure you get a good rest. Just be ready for what's ahead, for the day's work,
I live with this. This is my mantra for everything I do: accommodate, facilitate, and cooperate, with an attitude of gratitude. So you walk in. If you and I work a lot together, and you're the engineer,
yeah.
And if you have the free time, and if I have the free time, I'll come in the night before. Let's say the session starts at 10 the next morning. We'll set up the drums and have a ball, and I'll just hit those toms as much as you want me to, with one side of the stick or there, whatever you want to do. And then the next morning, when everybody's in there, nobody's got to sit down while the drummer's going, dong, dong, I hated that. And some engineers that are really, really, really good, but there ain't no retentive about that stuff. It's all about, we just got the take of doom. It's not going to get any better. Yeah, but the snare drum, dude, we can do one more take, but we just killed it, okay?
Yeah.
But they're worried about the snare sound. And the snare sound's fine because the song's grooving like crazy.
Yeah.
The next thing is, and I learned this from Tom Dowd. I did a lot of records with Tom, but not a lot, but at least half a dozen. You'd come in with your music, and I thought I was like this hotshot studio guy that, let me play this song, and I would say, take a little chart, 8 bars this, 2 bars transition, bridge comes here, so I would know when to shift gears on my playing. And I remember one day Tom Dowd coming to me. I could tell he was a little perturbed because I was just, whatever, man, I'm ready for you. He says, put that down, and here are the lyrics. I want you to read those lyrics before you play a note, all right? And it was such a great lesson because suddenly I was in the music. I was, not the music, in the lyrics. I knew the heart with what those, to me, it's like, that's a great song because the singer, first and foremost, is singing their butt off, and it's great, it's got a great groove. But they could be singing about, people say to me, that's a beautiful song. It's about a dog that got run over, but they took it to the vet and it got saved. But if the singer can't sing, the groove ain't there, I ain't hearing it.
Yeah.
So I really have a deficiency in appreciation for the lyrics. I really do. But when Tom Dowd did that to me, it was like such a wake-up call. It's like, dude, forget about you and your drumming and your music. I want you to check those lyrics out. So listen to the music, like Juan is saying. Check out the lyrics if you can get inside the heart or the soul of the song. And then accommodate, facilitate, cooperate. If they say you need to stand on your head and spit out ping pong balls, you say how many, right? And you leave whatever issues you may have behind. And if the session, God forbid, is dull, which hardly ever happened to me, I would work on my deficiencies. Hey, my hi-hat work is really not good. You're not opening it and shutting the way like Jeff Porcaro would say. And so I would work on whatever deficiencies I have. And so I would say that just become part of the mission and be there to put the wind in everybody's sails, particularly the artist. As an A&R guy, I A&R'd a bunch of records for Island Records for decades. It was their record, not mine. You know, I was there to provide a service for them.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a lot of the what this kind of encompasses is just a lot of being aware of everything that's going on, rather than just, okay, I'm the drummer, that's all I'm going to worry about. And a lot of the times, you know, outside of playing and, you know, trying to, you know, play your paradiddles and everything when the guitar player is tuning, it's a lot of really trying to hone in and kind of like what you were saying which is the vibe of the song and the emotion that you're trying to convey, because as much as we're just, you know, hitting buckets per se, we're also designating what the feeling is going to be with how we're playing everything. So you could play, for example, just like a normal, you know, rock beat, but at the same time, in the way that you're playing it, it's going to sound different. So I think that's really cool. I think just being aware of everything that's going on outside of just you, I think that's really interesting as well.
It's funny that he talked about the lyrics, because I don't read drum music, but my chart, if I get called for a session, is a lyric sheet, and I make my notes on the lyric sheet. Whatever fills, I make a note on that. So I think it's really important to play for the song, you know.
Yeah, that's really cool too. And I mean, in terms of like having like a sheet to kind of follow through, personally, as a drummer and the bands that I've played with, and even my band now, the closest thing that I've ever gotten to somewhat of something that I can read and kind of guide me through the song is nothing that makes any sense to anybody. Most of the time it's literally just like, okay, this is the name of the song, and then you have ones and zeros and twos, and I know that the 0 is just like just a downbeat, and then the 2 is just 2 hits. So you go, and a lot of the times it's, you know, you'll have like the numbers of like, you got 1, you got 5 all the way at the bottom, you got 2 right on top of that, and you just have to kind of go back and forth.
I love
and
it.
then somehow you're going like this. You're going like 1, 5, 3, 5. And
whatever works for you, bro.
yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I've never, for example, kind of like with you, like I've never had the ability to be able to read sheet drum music or
The
anything.
chart, yeah, drum
And
chart.
I know when I was kind of like in high school and trying to get into band, that was one of the reasons as to why I couldn't get in. They were like, oh, well, you should have been in this in middle school.
Yeah.
And now you're a little bit too late. And I do want to kind of emphasize that even if you don't get there and somebody tells you, oh, you can't, don't let somebody put you down and decide things for you, because you can still make those things happen regardless if you don't, you know, read the chart or, you know, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I wanted to get in band, but they wouldn't let me in. I was a troublemaker, so I could never get in band.
What are you talking about, man?
I got in trouble in school, you know, so they wouldn't let me in band.
Yeah.
Well, listen, learn your rudiments, learn to read. They don't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, perhaps, but it's just like, how could you not learn to read a book?
Right.
You know, it's just great when you learn to read. Then you can bring 4 people in a band, like, you know, not 4, like Snarky Puppy. I don't know if you know who that band is.
I love that band.
You know, those guys, and I was watching an interview with Steve Gadd with Rick Beato. I love Rick Beato. And he was just telling them, you know, you can get 4 strangers in a room, and if your reading is right, you're jamming in no time at all, because you feel comfortable about reading, just like reading a book.
Yeah.
And then the rudiments, which are supposedly 26 rudiments, there are more, of course, but you learn those, and those give you the facility to get around your drums making music instead of not. So I was, again, Mr. Pearl, Jesse Pearl, 7th grade through 9th grade. I owe him everything. If it wasn't for him, I don't know where I'd be right now.
Hopefully he's listening.
He died in 2020, but we spoke throughout the whole time. I mean, the guy was just, he was such a, you know,
That's
I
great.
tear up when I think of the dude, because he was the man.
That's amazing.
Sweet guy, Mr. Jesse
And you
Pearl.
know what? To that, I will say, hopefully he's listening.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So the rudiments then seem to be like the vocabulary for the reading that you're talking about.
The reading is
That's it.
vocabulary. The rudiments give you the facility to have your hands do what you're thinking, or you're just I never thought, it was just flying by the seat of my pants. I knew there was a fill coming at some point because the music dictated. But as I was doing the fill, I never got that good where I say, I'm going to do this. You know, I would just, here we go. And whatever happens, happens. But the rudiments is what allows you to sound somewhat like a drummer.
It's almost like it allows you the flexibility of moving around the different pieces in a musical way rather than bucka-tuka-tuka-tuka.
Yeah. Now, saying what I'm saying, there'll be somebody, woman, man, girl, boy, that doesn't need any of that. They get behind a set of drums and they were given a gift and they just tear it up.
Yeah.
And by tearing up, I mean the groove, the song just feels great. And they don't know a paradiddle from a clothes hanger. They just do what they do, and it's sort of you open your mouth like you're in heaven because you're watching, experiencing magic.
Yeah, I know with the kind of music that I'm involved in, a lot of the drummers are not so keen on the rudiments and those kind of things, and I mean you would be surprised because
I am surprised.
The music is very intense.
Yeah.
It's taxing on your body. And it's to the point where like I've gone to some of my favorite drummers and I'm like, so what are some of the exercises you do? And they're just like, oh, just single strokes for like 5 minutes at like 140 BPM, 16th notes. I'm like,
that'll do it.
Okay, well that's not too bad. But what else? They're like, oh yeah, you do that for 5 minutes, then you move to like 250, 16th notes, blah blah blah. So you do that for like 5 minutes, and if you can do it, then you're ready to play the show. And I'm like, that's it. No crazy warm up or anything. No, that's it. And then you do it with the feet and then blah, blah. And then you ask them like, okay, so what about the fills? They're like, what about the fills? Just play it.
Wow.
Then they don't have really that much input. And I feel like it's because a lot of them just don't even worry about that. They can do it, but they don't necessarily rely on a lot of those things. And I think from just playing this kind of music for a long time, I feel like it's because we're, in one way, tailoring to the guitar and accenting what the guitar is doing.
Yeah.
And just in our heads, we're listening to that. And then we're trying to play the guitar with our drums rather than to be the backbone, because everything matters. Kind of like the vocalist is another instrument. The guitar player is another instrument, the bass is another instrument, and everybody just pretty much has to be on their own kind of like clock, but it all works together. And I think that's really interesting where, for example, like I try my best to get into, playing like the rudiments and everything. But I do find myself just like looking at a lot of drummers and, they're doing like double stroke rolls, just like, and it's like, okay, so great, you could do that. Nobody else can, and it doesn't come from rudiments.
Yeah,
or,
exactly.
I mean, it could,
It could, but sometimes it's just natural ability. They have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder what Frank Zappa would think about these guys, right? I mean, he was a king of like, what do you call it? Oh my God, when people play together the same phrasing. Unison. And you go see Zappa with Steve Vai and forget what drummer I saw. It might have been Terry Bozzio. It was ridiculous. But these guys are doing it like throughout. They're just riffing the whole time. You go, dude, unbelievable. I got to put some seatbelts on.
Polyrhythms and
it's awesome.
Still keeping the 4/4 groove while playing polyrhythms. So in terms of, for example, like in a song arrangement, right? Do you think it's more important to start with a drum foundation, or do you think in terms of writing a song, do you think it would be more beneficial to kind of start with some of the other instruments and then write the drums? Because I feel like whichever way you go, the song is going to turn out slightly different. Whether you start with the drums first and kind of establish kind of like the backbone, or you already have some kind of preconceived notion of what the instruments are going to be doing, and then you apply the drums. What do you think would be like what you would do?
When you're talking about composing, remember I wanted to play the French horn, and I was made to play drums. So I'm much more about changes. I write changes. My favorite thing to do is changes. The melody comes, but that's the first thing I do, and I always with a keyboard. piano with different sounds, and a patch meaning a sound that a synthesizer makes, will somehow, don't ask me why or how, kiss your fingers in the right place. You get a patch that sounds like something, and all of a sudden, whoa, and you do this, and you're this innocent bystander. This thing's coming from somewhere, and then immediately you take your pencil out and you write down, whatever the chord is, and then you proceed, section A, maybe section B, whatever it is. The drums are my last thing that I'm thinking about at that point.
I agree with Joe there.
And then what I used to do, I would abuse the hell out of a great keyboard player synthesizer guy, because I'd say, this part needs a flute, but I hate it. Don't put a flute here. We need a flute that's found 6 feet under the ground after the apocalypse. And so you take this flute out, and you have a very hard time keeping it in tune, and there's a grit that no matter how hard you try, it's going to be there.
Yeah.
But the part has to be very, very hopeful, very romantic and soulful. But the flute has to be hurting. All right. And this part here, I want it to sound like there's a tribe of real mean guys, but they're happy because the rains finally came. Yeah. And by the river, the women are doing the laundry, and the kids are singing over here. So that's what we're going for. Here are the changes. Now let's go there. And I would give that keyboard player either co-writer or, because they were going to spend a week with me, sometimes working on a song, sometimes on a part. Because it was just like you were saying earlier, you have to find your own lane.
Yeah.
Right? And I was one of the first to start doing African music with Angelique Joe and Baba Mao. And those were great opportunities to bring different elements from different places and just put them in together and see what happens. But that takes, a lot of, turning over stones. No, that's not going to do it. It's this way.
Yeah.
So the drum beat is the last thing that I'm thinking about if I'm writing.
Yep.
That's interesting. I know for me, it's
the other way.
It's the other way around. But at the same time, it does kind of come, I feel like, slightly at the same time. I know, for example, I was just writing music yesterday, and we had been stuck on this part for a long time. And a lot of the times in my kind of music, the drum fill is basically what dictates the transition. And I had to bring in the singer and say, what do you think? You don't play any instruments.
That's great.
Tell us what you think. And immediately as I played the song, he was like, stop. Sucks. Take it out. And now we finished the arrangement, and that was exactly what we needed after multiple times of just cycling over and just rethinking the same thing. Because at the end of the day, if you just have two people in the same mindset who just like keep going over the same thing, when you need that third person to come in and just either just be in the room or just tell you when it sucks, flat out.
Love the way that he said we, which was great. You know what I'm saying? For when I started with this whole new business back in 83, 84, it was just me pretty much. And then I really missed that we.
Oh, yeah.
You may have 5 ideas, but when the 3 of us come into the room, you may ask us, and Drigo may say, it's this one, and just him saying that, you go, no, it's not. I know what it is now. You just need that feedback of that person.
Yeah, the feedback is really important.
It's the play, I feel, from just like multiple people in the room, where in some ways, kind of like what we talked about earlier, where we, for example, nowadays we may not get a lot of us playing and recording in the same room, but as far as the writing process, it is done in the same room. Mm-hmm. And even now where it's even more difficult because we can write something on Skype, or on Zoom.
Yeah, I know, it's great. I think that's great.
Which our last record we did strictly on Zoom and Skype and FaceTime because it was like COVID and everything.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's still an example of us working together rather than how nowadays a lot of bands are doing it, where they write a certain part, and especially with like how Pro Tools has kind of come a long way, where you can just render something, it loads up on the other person's screen and so forth. It's starting to kind of detach a little bit from like the physical or even like emotional, just being in the same kind of room.
Yeah, emotional is another great word. I'm going to open up a can of worms here. Let's say you're the writer of the band, but the guitar player is a monster player, and he introduces textures and parts. Your bass player is also very musical. And all of a sudden you have this record and it becomes a big hit record. And suddenly you are the writer of the song, supposedly, and you're getting this ridiculous checks for 6 figures, right? But your guitar player ain't. Your guitar player is struggling financially. So is your bass player and whoever else is in the band. Like John Lennon and Paul McCartney did, and many other bands, at some point, I would think it's only just, even if you give them a arranging credit and money in publishing and or writers, because I think that's where a lot of angst within bands start to happen. You know, whoever, I don't know, you worked a lot with the Eagles, Bruce. I like to find out what the dynamic was between the dude that played bass and sang his ass off and you know, was a big part of that sound, to the dude that played drums or guitar who wrote and sang.
Yeah.
You know, one's buying houses on Malibu, the other one's kind of like, you know, not struggling, but, you know, so after a while, you have a unit of X amount of people that are really, really, really tight until this success happens and the financial flow starts to differ from one individual to the other. That's something that I would tell young people today to be cognizant of.
And the band was a prime example of that. Robbie made all the money.
Dude.
And, you know.
I have a story about that because I worked with Leon Helm and Robbie, and not Robbie Robertson, the bass player and the keyboard player on a project with Island Records.
Garth Hudson.
And they had written, Leon Helm had written a book called This Wheel's on Fire.
I read it, a great book.
The amount of visceral horribleness that he felt towards Robbie
yeah,
was, he almost a session stopped. You know, he just had to vent. Because I just had happened to buy the book before going to work with him, and we were at his barn, and I could feel it from that, because he said Robbie Robertson started hanging out with Martin Scorsese,
mm-hmm.
and they were like playing in Hollywood, having a great time. The rest of the guys were, you know, woodshedding and this and that and the other, and they became like the Robertson show, and the other guys were like, well, what is this?
Exactly.
And then Robbie called, hey, guess what? The band's breaking up. And we're going to make this movie called, you know, Last Waltz.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? And so, again, for any young or old people that are listening, and you do have a unit of people that you depend on, they show up to work every day, they're at rehearsals, they do give you input, think about when that revenue stream starts to come in. If you don't have a hit record, none of it matters. But if you get lucky where you start making some good, you know, royalties, think about that, keeping that unit together, because without that unit, I've been in successful things several times, and what happened as soon as we became successful, it came apart. People lost their focus, and the revenue streams became not all that even compared to the input of making the music, and things went south.
So in terms of, you know, you mentioned royalties and stuff like that. What do you have any experience with like sync licensing? You know, getting some of your music licensed to, like, I mean, we talked about how like you've written certain piece of music and then they've landed on films and stuff like that. How does, you know, do you have an experience on how some of that stuff works? And maybe can you like speak a little bit about that?
Again, if you're listening, or you're young or old, whatever, creative people were really, really, really bad about finances. if you're the record company guy, or you're the person that deals with finances, and I'm the music guy, I'm gonna kill myself to make you as good of a record as possible. You're trying to get as much money as possible. And again, you don't find this out until the record becomes a hit, that you signed your publishing away, and you signed this away, and you signed that away, and suddenly your name is on that record that you wrote it, but the dude is talking with the movie or the Budweiser commercial that's offering 350 G's for, you have nothing to say about that.
Right.
And if you have a beef with a guy, or the guy's got a beef with you, he can just negotiate piddly squat, because he's either got a vendetta or he doesn't know any better. So the next thing I'm going to say, if you're up and coming, or if you've been doing this all your life, publishing is where the money is. That's where you get, you know, there's royalties called mechanicals for record sales, which don't exist anymore, of course, because everybody's streaming for free, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then there's performance royalties, which is, every time that record plays, wherever it plays, you get money. So when you write a hit record, it's like a pinball machine. All of a sudden you get like bonus, you sold this many records, or this record has played so many times in the radio. So I don't know how they calculate this. So you get an extra 50 G's. You go, oh yeah, beautiful. Yeah. So, but yes, it's you have to make sure that if you can retain the rights to that music. Now it gets very, very tricky because we got a great vibe here. We got the four of us. We're about to do something, and the last thing I want to bring up is, hey, Drigo, so how much do I get?
Yeah.
And how are we going to break this up? Because you're a coward. You're afraid you're going to break the vibe, or you're going to be offended. And if you're a crook, you are going to act like you're offended. So you can get back to, hey, dudes, let's make this song, right? And because you're in the back of your mind, you're going to try to control this, the revenue stream, because that's how you got rich, most of these people. I'm not going to mention any names, but I've been through the coals with that situation where you realize at the end of the day what you've signed, that really was a horrible outcome. So publishing, try to have the publishing, at least half of the publishing.
Yeah.
You can give half the publishing. Now, I'm going to contradict myself. If this guy is a record mogul, and I know that my record's going to get on the radio, but he says to me, dude, I got to have the publishing or we ain't doing business, I'm going to do business because I'll never have a record on the radio. And down the road, I can use that that credit. That's what got me into Island Records, really, to say, yeah, I did write this song, I did produce or did play it, whatever it is. And so I will, be willing to get stooped because he's got the ability to get my song on the radio. So you got to, every instance in life has its own dynamic that you have to use common sense, humility, and, try to just do the right thing for the right reasons.
Kind of like pick your battles and like really assess everything as it comes.
Yeah, and when you're young and somebody says to you, your record's going to be on the radio, you don't care. What do I sign on the trunk of a car at 3 a.m? Let's do this.
You want to pay them up front, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's weird, man, but it's, you got to put food on the table. And you don't realize what you've done unless a record becomes a big hit. Then you go, oh, my God.
Then you start thinking, wow, like here's where all the money's going to get split.
Yeah, that guy's making $1. I'm making maybe 25 cents, and I did everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know I've played in some. I've done drums for a couple of different sessions where, the first thing that the artist does is they come in and they're like, "Cool, here's the contract. Can you please sign it?" And I'm like, "Well, what is this?"
Weird,
and
right?
They're like, "Before we get into anything." And I think that in some ways that might, that kind of was like, okay, so you're serious. Number one, number two. Let's just get it done out of the way before we have that kind of like emotional connection. Because then everything's already done. You already have the expectation of where everything's going to go. And then number three, it's just a lot easier afterwards to realize, okay, this is how much I got paid. This is what I'm going to get. So there's not that much of having to second guess or anything like that. And the nice thing about it too is you could at that moment start putting some of like the things that you request and just make sure that they're also in the contract.
Yeah. Well, that's in your world, which is great. You've learned to do that. In my day, I was too stupid, too ignorant, too young to even think about that stuff. And the other folks were not. They really knew what they were doing. And so that wasn't discussed. And if you did have that thought later on as you got more experience, you go, do I bring this up now and perhaps like kill the vibe, or what do I do? And I was just too much about the song and the music and having a great time playing and try to achieve something to even let that, get in the way. That was my stupidity. That was just my, something a flaw.
And to bring Tony Battaglia up again, every record he produced, he wrote at least 2 or 3 songs on it.
Great songwriter.
That's cool.
So, he was thinking ahead.
Well, I think the trend now is that major artists have 15 songwriters on a song.
So isn't that weird?
Yeah.
But you know why that is?
Well, economics more than.
Well, no, it's sampling. Like for example, real quick, Oh shit! The Puff Daddy did a song in the 2000, 2001. The guy, the artist's name was Mace. Song was called Bad Boy, I think. And they used a sample of a song I wrote called Bad Boy for Gloria Estefan. It was a big, big song. Kool and the Gang also were sampled for that song. And so it was like you're saying, 9 people. Even if you're Justin Bieber or you're Justin Timberlake, you know, whatever, you look at those credits and you're right. It's like, my God, there's like 20 people here. That's because they're using samples, a bar here, a section here. And so all those people got to get paid, which is, in my opinion, what the hey, you know?
Everybody has to get credit for it.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a lot of people.
Yeah. And I mean, even now, like I have friends who record and they produce everybody. And then when the song lands on Spotify, it lands on everywhere. You look at the credits and there's no credit.
That's terrible. And I have that same problem now. I used to go to All Music to find, because I want to know who that drummer is. Country music these days has some great players. Whoa, some great players. So I want to see who that drummer is.
Yeah.
And I can't find the credits. Like, dude, how can you shortchange these people, not list the people who are playing on this record?
And I think a lot of that reason is because, again, people are not signing these agreements where it literally states, give me the credit. You know, it's like the credit at this point, it's basically free. Like, you should just get it.
Yes.
And
it's always been that way.
Yeah. And it's like, regardless how much you're getting paid, even if you're not getting paid at all, the least you should get is the credit. Because then that is something that you can, especially nowadays with like your electronic portfolio, you could link everything together. And by just having your name on something, like IMDb's and stuff like that, that is kind of like an electronic signature of everything that you've done and your experience. So it's imperative, I think, in today's world, to ask for some of these like kind of uncomfortable moments and just kind of right off the bat say, hey, so this is what I think we should do in terms of the royalties and stuff like that. And I think it's also a little bit tougher now because of the way the music is distributed, in terms of, for example, you have DistroKid, TuneCore, CD Baby, and some of these different outlets where you can just completely forget about adding credits to people.
Yeah, that's my opinion. If I don't find a credit, I'm upset.
Yeah.
Because I want to see who that drummer is. I get off on that. It's like, whoa, I got to check this. Let's see what other records this dude played on.
Yep.
You know, and then just the tree that keeps connecting.
Yep. And most of the time you just see.
I do the same thing in all music. I go, when I hear something, I go, I wonder who that was.
Nowadays, it's getting hard on all music. It used to have all the credits. Now, sometimes not.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Right.
Nowadays, you just see the name of the band, and that's it.
Yeah.
And you got to go and do all your own research.
And supposedly that is the point of metadata in mastering, is to list all those credits. And the Recording Academy has the branch that's working on those kinds of credits be included in the metadata.
Please, man, let whatever we can do to do that.
But what happens is that so many people are mastering records in their bedroom, they're mixing and mastering, have no idea what the metadata is or how to enter it.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's dedicated programs to include that, and it's included in the header of the WAV file that you buy or stream. And that's how you see it when it plays on your radio. You see the credits of the song. It's the metadata embedded in the actual audio file.
My wife Nancy also worked with Island Records for a while, and she did the label copy. And that was a lot of phone calls late in the night, making sure everybody's name was on there, all the T's were crossed, all the I's were dotted. A lot of work to do that.
But that information is harder to find now.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, that's not a good thing.
I meant to ask you, off topic, I remember going down to Stephen's Talk House. I'm playing down in South Beach. How far was the studio from there?
Right down the street.
Right
We're
down the
right on
street.
12th and Collins. Beautiful.
I remember
Really.
doing a show with Lester Chambers down there, and Earl King did 2 shows. And Tony said, you know, Joe has got a studio with Chris Blackwell down here somewhere.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how far you guys were from that.
I saw NRBQ, one of my favorite bands of
Oh,
all times. I mean,
absolutely.
Weather Report, NRBQ, my taste in music are all over the road, but I'm one of their biggest fans,
Me
and
too,
they're
me
friends of
too.
mine. Terry just even stayed at my house.
Joey,
Joey Spot.
Yeah.
They're no longer together,
No,
those
no,
two guys,
yeah, no.
unfortunately. But magic shows. I become a kid
Oh.
in those shows, and Stephen Talk had some great shows.
we opened one of the bands that I was in from Orlando. We opened a couple of shows for NRBQ, and it was like when they had the
Dude.
whole wheat horns. Remember the whole?
Yeah,
horn?
sure.
It was what a.
They're
great
still at it. They're still working like crazy.
Is
Terry
Terry
Adams
play-
is.
Terry's
Terry's
playing?
got a new band, new NRBQ,
Yeah,
kicking butt, man. They're go catch their last albums from 2011 to the present.
what a great band.
Really great band. An American treasure. You know, when Elvis Costello says that NRBQ is the best band in America, period, I'm not
That's
going to
saying
dispute it.
something right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Bonnie Raitt does their stuff all the time. Dave Edmonds, they're a band that people need to listen to.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, I think we're going to have to draw things to a close. here.
Oh, man.
Although I could stay here the rest of the day.
Joe was just getting started.
Where's the sleeping bags, man?
I have to say, this is a joy for me to do this with my Cuban brother, Joe Galdo.
Likewise,
this
brother.
Is,
Likewise.
this is big.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
This is where
Likewise.
we bring the sandwiches.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us on the Reel to Reel podcast from the Melrose Center. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, with my co-host, Drigo. We'd like to thank our guests, Joe Galdo and Juan Perez. We have so much more in store coming up in the future episodes. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcasting app. Join us next month for another episode with another exclusive look at life behind the board in the audio industry. Thanks to Carol Hensel for our theme music. It's a wrap.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, guys. A lot of fun.
Yeah,
Oh.
it was great, man.